I mentioned at the start of the show we have a guest joining us. I'm so happy. I reached out relatively late in time to see if he was available, and it turns out he was, which is a great thing for this show. We have Jason Isaac joining us, and he's with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which we've had many guests on the show from that organization. Texas Public Policy Foundation, based in Austin, Texas, is the premier state think tank in the country. And honestly, it's not just me saying that. Whenever they have organizational meetings of the conservative think tanks in the country, TPPF is just always stellar. It is filled with extremely competent, serious, thoughtful people. And the one person we're talking today is Jason Isaac, singular Isaac, and he is heading up their group. And actually, I can't remember the name of the particular group within TPPF, but I'm let him tell you about it. But it has to do with energy. And the reason I have him on is the reason that I'm sitting here in my home studio today instead of in our normal, beautiful studio. And that is because Texas doesn't have enough power right now. We had a huge storm. We have another snowstorm coming tonight in the area where I live in Dallas, Texas. And our power grid has not exactly met the need. We have rolling blackouts. I'm grateful to say, obviously, we are not experiencing that at this time. We have power. We have rolling blackouts. We have, wind and solar power investments having made that seem not to have been worth it right now. So I want to first of all welcome Jason Isaac to the show. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Glad you're here. And I'm just going to open up with my question. Why is Texas, a little play on words, why is Texas powerless? How could we be in this position? In Texas, we are the premier or among the premier producers of oil, of natural gas. We're energy producers. We're energy abundant. How could Texas be struggling in this storm?
Well, it's really heartbreaking. We've written for the last couple of years about issues in Germany where the Germans have decided they're going to go 100% renewable. And what's happened is the energy costs have skyrocketed. They're importing natural gas from the Russians. They're mowing down forests now to get the coal, and they're having to subsidize coal and natural gas because it just isn't working. And what we've written about is that freezing deaths have been on the rise in these Eastern European countries that are trying to virtue signal to the self-righteous elites that they're going to go 100% renewable because of the catastrophic climate crisis that we're all living wonderfully through, with deaths down 98.9% from weather-related events over the last 100 years. Man has become more resilient as we have access to affordable, reliable energy. And that's the story we tell at the Life Powered Project at Texas Public Policy Foundation, is we make that connection between access to energy, affordable, reliable energy, and human flourishing. And so it's really unprecedented that we're seeing this happen in Texas, of all places. But you've had some market interruption that's become very predominant over the last 10 years, and it's incentives. It started 40 years ago with incentives for wind. Hey, they just need a little prop up to help them get going. And Congress just extended investment tax credits, production tax credits through the end of this year and the end of next year. And then on top of that, the state also gives them millions of dollars in subsidies and exemptions of property taxes, which increases our burdens for those of us that are actually paying property taxes. Millions and millions of dollars, and a lot of it to foreign controlled and based companies. And those investments distorted the market. We've seen an incredible growth of unreliables, wind and solar, over the last 4 to 5 years. And we've seen an unfortunate distortion where we've seen our thermal generation, nuclear, natural gas, and coal, shut down. 3,000 megawatts of power, which would be an incredible help to our grid right now. An addition of 20,000 megawatts of wind and solar over the last 4 to 5 years. It's appalling that it's happening here, but this is what happens when you have market distortions like subsidies that government has provided and just given them overwhelmingly to unreliable energy.
Is the reason these kind of benefits are given, is it, I don't know if you use the term virtue signaling, but is it kind of because of pressure of the left to continue to push these things when they are not actually capable of meeting our energy needs? Is it political, or is it actually just didn't follow through what they thought would be a reasonable outcome from it?
Oh, Oh, it's absolutely political. It's about controlling everything we do in our lives. It's about paving the pathway to socialism. Because next thing, and I mentioned this 2 years ago, I said electricity will become a right. And the left will co-opt that and say that everyone is due electricity. And they'll use it as an opportunity to have a universal electric system. Like you talked about elections, we've talked about healthcare. This is just a pathway to socialism where the leftists want the government to control everything because they think they know what's best for us, when free markets, liberty, and individual responsibility work best. And we've proven that time and time again here in Texas. But unfortunately, these self-righteous coastal elites have made their way in and pressured our political leaders to support subsidies for this unreliable energy. And then they're going to say, oh, there's going to be enough battery storage eventually. It's going to be about 500 or 600 years before we have enough batteries to meet today's demands.
You know, it's an interesting thing. People think across the country. I mean, I grew up in New York and I lived in California many years, practiced law there. People think of Texas as this just bastion of conservatives, and maybe East Coast elites get pushed around, maybe Californians get pushed around, but man, Texas, and we do, have a conservative majority still in Texas in the legislature, a kind of a free market oriented majority. So what's it going to take? Is this disaster we're experiencing right now in Texas? Is this I had the kind of perverse thought, maybe it is well timed, this pretty much unprecedented ice and snowstorm, and more where we live in Dallas, more coming today. And maybe a wake-up call to the legislators to say, we've got to make a shift here because we don't have, and the other, so that's one thing. Isn't this almost a good thing as we're in session right now? And then also, what is the status of our electric grid? Isn't there a lot of concern our electric grid isn't quite as where it should be?
Yeah, I'll talk about the timing, and unfortunately, it is good timing right now. I had predicted this would happen in last August had it not been for the COVID pandemic and the economy essentially being shut down. We would not have had enough electricity to meet demands in a roaring economy that we're used to here in Texas. I wasn't anticipating it happening in cold snap in February, but that's where we are today. And again, freezing temperatures are much more harmful than warming temperatures, and that's a big concern. And as an elected official, a former elected official, I was one of these people that was out there touting, oh, look, Texas is the nation's leader in wind generation. I had no idea the information that I have now. And being a world leader in installed capacity is much different than being a world leader in generating electricity. And during these awful times, wind has been generating about 2.5% of its installed capacity, but we're subsidizing 100% of it. And so our elected leaders have got to wake up and make some realizations that unreliable energy doesn't need to be on our grid. We've called for, at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, one of our legislative priorities relating to grid reliability is that if you're going to put unreliables on the grid, then you've either got to provide reliable, dispatchable electricity or contract with someone who can, so that our planners at the Electric Reliability Council of Texas can better plan for meeting our demands. Now, what happened with our grid? Wind dropped off, and you've got to keep the grid charged. You have to keep a load in the lines. And when that load gets too low, you're going to trip power plants, thermal power plants, the ones that we count on. And that load late Sunday night, early Monday morning, our demand got too high as temperatures dropped. People's thermostats started kicking on, turning on their heaters. And you had actual thermal power plants get tripped and shut down. And that just exacerbated the problem, making things worse. ERCOT essentially fell asleep at the wheel. They should have caught this late Sunday night, started implementing rolling blackouts for 30 minutes at a time. And now what's happening is some cases you have people that have no power for 30 hours at a time. Already 10 deaths reported because of the temperatures. This is just unacceptable. I'm glad to see the governor has called this an emergency item. If it weren't for this weather event, this would not have been a priority, although we've been essentially writing and talking about this to our elected officials for years at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. So the timing is good in that aspect. I just hope our Texans can stay safe.
Oh, yeah. On the subject of the grid, I know it sounds like a term, people are just, you have a picture, a visual of it, like it's something up in the sky, kind of like a big spider web all connected. But what is the grid, really? It's a series of, we Texans pride ourselves and have our own grid, I think. But can you, what is it exactly? It's a,
We do it and just kind of think of it as a spider web interconnected, where if you lose generation in one point and then they take it down for maintenance, then you can pick up in other points. And the ones that are best responsible, that can best respond to demand increases, is natural gas and our clean coal technology here in Texas. Wind, you're dependent on when the wind blows. Solar, you're dependent on when the sun shines and if the panels aren't covered in dust or snow like they are now. But with natural gas, you can ramp up and ramp down. Nuclear is great baseload, but it's all interconnected like a spider web. And so if you have an outage in one area, you can typically pick up the load unless you're in really high demand periods like you are today. And the grid has come very close to having a complete catastrophic failure. This was early Monday morning, where the entire ERCOT grid almost went down. That means a complete power outage for over 80% of Texans. That came close, and it's going to continue to happen likely tonight as demand increases, as temperatures continue to drop, and I think more snow predicted in central Texas today and tomorrow. But these temperatures are going to remain this way throughout the week. And so we've just got to bundle up and do the best we can. And then we've got to keep our elected officials accountable to make sure that we're putting reliable, affordable electricity on our grid.
I love that. Tell me again what ERCOT stands for.
Well, I think they dropped the R recently. It's the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and we have not had any reliability whatsoever. But they really need to add an A for affordable, because there's nothing that connects human flourishing more than having access to affordable, reliable electricity.
Yeah. Isn't it the case also that even if the prior to this current emergency in Texas, where we have just this massive freeze and all the problems you're describing, energy coming from wind and solar were still only comprising, I'm sure you know the numbers, but comprising a not particularly significantly large percentage of the total energy needed in Texas. If everything were working perfectly, what is it that the wind and solar, what portion of the energy we need is produced by wind and solar?
Nationally, it's about 4%. Texas saw about 20% of its electricity last year from wind and solar, which was a record high. Now, keep in mind that they get a priority access to the grid. The cheapest electricity gets access to the grid first and foremost. And when you're so heavily subsidized, and we've seen this happen before in Texas, where wind is actually paying consumers to take their products, because not only do they get subsidies from government, but they get subsidies from virtue signalers like Apple, who buy all these credits so that they can say they're 100% renewable. They're not 100% renewable. They may be paying credits for the electricity that they use so that they can say that, but it's not an entirely accurate claim. When you have cities like Georgetown, Texas, that are now in multi-million dollars worth of debt because of bad contracts buying wind and solar credits at 3 times the cost of natural gas produced electricity now, their citizens are hurting big time and paying the price. When Austin shelves a power plant, they spend over $2 billion on an East Texas power plant that never produced electricity. Their plan was to have this renewable power plant that burns wood waste or biomass, wood pellets. Would have been wonderful to have that on the grid right now. And to think that CPS Energy in the city of San Antonio is wanting to shelve, with $1 billion still left in debt payments, the Spruce coal plant in San Antonio, which doesn't just feed and provide reliable electricity to San Antonians, it feeds the entire electric grid. Our state government's got to step in and take these rights away from these cities that are out of control, that are loco control big time, and make sure that we've got reliable, affordable electricity for all Texans.
Okay, I didn't know about that coal plant example, but I was going to tell you that I think it's one of the troubling things about energy policy that people who are more leftist, more determined to have, they think that there's a magical answer with somehow we're all going to have, wind energy and solar power is going to provide everything. They're more likely to be advocates and to be vocal with legislators at local levels. And you're talking about San Antonio and the Texas legislature, and people who just function normally and they're used to their lives being comfortable and they aren't invested in the environmental argument, are not there, giving the other message to the legislators about we actually want reliable energy more than anything else, and we want to have, and we're fine with with clean coal. I mean, the coal industry has vastly improved their their processes. So we're great with clean coal. We want natural gas. We want oil. We want all of it used. It's like the legislators don't have enough of an organized nucleus of people feeding that message, and it's easier just to kowtow to the environmentalists who keep saying, no, supplement more and more. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
No, that's absolutely a fair assessment. People like me are out working and raising families and providing for our families and don't have time to go spend at the legislature all day. And I saw this when I worked and served in the legislature. The people that were there every day, it was like they were getting paid to advocate for things against the benefit of a majority of Texans. And they were advocating against affordable, reliable electricity. They were advocating against coal. And that's unbelievable because we are world leaders when it comes to reducing harmful air pollution. So we are world leaders in clean air here in the United States. We're number one when it comes to access to clean and safe drinking water. Our environment is incredible, and economic prosperity and environmental leadership go hand in hand. Over the last 4 and 5 years, I've been advocating to our previous federal administrations, our current federal administration, that we need to have a Pittsburgh Accord where we call on our trading partners to meet our air quality. Paris Accord will do absolutely nothing, and John Kerry has even said that himself. It's too late. It's not going to do anything. Let's worry about harmful pollution and lifting people out of poverty. And energy, access to energy lifts people out of poverty. When you climb out of poverty, you start to worry about the environment. You clean up your air quality and your water quality, and in turn, human health improves. But they're not concerned about that. They're concerned about controlling every aspect of our lives, getting rich off it while doing it, and it's just incredibly unfortunate.
It really is. And one thing you said earlier, I meant to follow up on. You talked about this, the way that the energy industry has been pushing more, the leftist side of the aisle, and pushing toward production of energy through solar and wind and other natural ways, which are not sufficient to provide our needs. That there's going to be, through, as we watch this socialist march into Washington by the American left, there's going to be a notion that electricity is a right, kind of like food and housing, education, everything else that it is a need is defined as a right. And then there's going to be the basis, therefore, to regulate the use by private citizens, because you're using too much over here, and if you didn't use this guy might have enough. It is yet another avenue toward shifting our precious country, from the idea of a country rooted in liberty and guarantee the notion of individuals living in liberty, to a just flipped on its head, a government-controlled society deciding who can have what kind of power and how much. And so there's a great need to reinvigorate the argument for all sorts of energy production in Texas and in America. And the other thing this is my little soapbox speech, it's got to be more active, everyone does, in reassuring these things. And so we're talking with Jason Isaac, and I'm so grateful he was available. He is a former state representative. He's the current director of Life Powered at a great organization, Texas Public Policy Foundation. I will, in closing, say I also think this may sound to our listeners all over the country, well, you're just talking about Texas, this is a unique problem there, but the same dynamics are played out in state after state after state, where legislators are pushed by the more radical environmental mindset that says we can easily, quickly get rid of coal, even if it's clean coal. We can get rid of nuclear, we can get rid of gas, we can get rid of natural gas, we can go all natural with unreasonable deadlines placed on, or unreasonable, we can get there by X year. And all it does, this is a great microcosm right here of what happens when you take that thinking seriously, is that you end up causing people to suffer, because we don't have the capacity to produce the energy we need based on using the style of energy production that are natural, so wind and solar. So you want to comment on that last point?
Yeah, I will just say you're right. People have become indoctrinated. They have a different faith than I practice. Theirs is religious alarmism, mine is Christianity. And it's unfortunate because they're pessimists. And they think that our world is going to end when it's never been better and our environment has never been better. Access to clean water is something that people strive for every day. And Debbie, I'll leave you with this point. Women spend 220 million hours a day walking to collect water. around the world. And that is
Oh my
appalling.
gosh.
Imagine the civic engagement that they could get involved in. Imagine the businesses that they could start. Imagine the education that they could further themselves by if we only gave them access to energy. And when our current administration steps in and says, we're not going to loan money to developing countries unless they're only investing it in renewable energy projects and not fossil fuels. Those renewable energy projects and products are not made possible without fossil fuels. And so I love it when people say we want to ban fossil fuels. I say, you first. Give me your phone, give me your computer.
Yeah.
Please don't give me the clothing that you're wearing. But the people don't understand the microfibers in our clothes are made with fossil fuels and made possible by fossil fuels. And it is really a godsend to millions of people around the world. And we've got millions of more that need to reach it so that we can lift them out of poverty.
Great closing point. Jason Isaac, thank you so much for being available today. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on, Debbie. Appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you too. Okay, I want to tell you folks, there was a great video that a little comic somebody made, and I didn't get a chance to send to Matt the Wonderful, but it was a great picture. In Texas, we have all of these windmills and the wind power. So they had a photo of a helicopter in the air in this blizzard snowstorm. So it's so cold here that the windmills have frozen. So there's ice caked on the windmills, so they can't spin, so they can't produce energy. So the helicopter up in the air. So the helicopter powered by, oil and natural gas, and powered by oil, gasoline, that is spraying a product onto this windmill, that the product itself is oil-based, made from oil products, trying to free this windmill so it can start spinning again. I mean, the amount of energy consumed and healthy, good energy consumed, created by gas, in order to try to spray this stuff onto the windmill. I mean, it was just a picture of the craziness where we are now. So anyway, not just true in Texas, true everywhere in America. More people need to be telling the legislators about the desire to have natural, to not be fanciful, not be, caught up in silly notions about how we can somehow power America in the next 5 years on all natural products. And he's exactly right. Jason Isaac is exactly right that the mission, the thinking behind it is very much on the track of getting America down the path of socialism and away from freedom.